Welcome to Bedtime Science. Tonight we explore the quiet science of what happens at the boundary between life and death, a place millions of people have briefly visited and returned from with strangely consistent stories. Before we begin, did you know that in 2014, researchers at 15 hospitals placed hidden images on high shelves in emergency rooms, visible only from the ceiling, to test whether patients who reported floating above their bodies during cardiac arrest could actually see them? Or that a 2013 study at the University of Michigan found that the brains of rats produced a sudden surge of organized gamma wave activity in the first 30 seconds after their hearts stopped, electrical patterns associated with heightened conscious awareness. Or that across cultures separated by thousands of miles, from rural India to suburban Ohio, people who briefly die and return describe strangely similar sequences: leaving the body, entering another space, encountering a presence. Yet the specific imagery shifts to match their local religious traditions. Tonight, we will gently explore 100 facts about near-death experiences. We will learn what doctors and researchers have carefully measured about the dying brain. We will trace the recurring patterns that appear across thousands of accounts spanning cultures and centuries. And we will consider what these brief journeys to the edge of death may reveal about the nature of human consciousness itself. Before we begin, if you find comfort here tonight, please consider subscribing to join our quiet community. Or, if you are still awake, leave a soft comment below about what mystery of the human mind we should explore next. Let us begin. The heart stops, blood pressure drops to zero, the monitors flatline, but the brain does not follow so quickly. Fact 1. Clinical death begins when the heart stops pumping blood, but the brain does not shut down in a single moment. Cells remain active for minutes, gradually losing oxygen in a slow cascade rather than a sudden blackout. The neurons in your cortex, roughly 86 billion of them, do not all go dark at once. Instead, they flicker. Some regions lose function within seconds. Others hold on for 4, 5, even 6 minutes. It is a rolling wave of silence spreading across the tissue, like lights going out across a city block by block. And it is in this narrow window, these few minutes of residual activity, that something happens. Something that thousands of people have come back to describe. Fact 2. In 2013, a research team at the University of Michigan made an observation that changed the conversation about the dying brain. They monitored the neural activity of rats as their hearts stopped beating. What they found was not a quiet fading. In the first 30 seconds after cardiac arrest, the rats' brains produced a sharp surge of coherent gamma oscillations, brain waves cycling between 25 and 55 hertz. These are the same high-frequency patterns associated in living brains with focused attention, visual processing, and conscious perception. The surge was organized. It was synchronized across multiple brain regions, and it exceeded the levels of gamma activity measured when the same rats were fully awake and alert. The dying brain, it appeared, was not shutting down. It was lighting up. Fact 3. The largest study ever conducted on consciousness during clinical death is called AWARE, an acronym for awareness during resuscitation. Dr. Sam Parnia, a critical care physician at the State University of New York, led the project. His team screened 2,060 cardiac arrest events across 15 hospitals in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Austria. The study ran for 4 years, from 2008 to 2012. Its purpose was simple, but its execution was extraordinarily difficult. To determine whether conscious awareness persists after the heart stops, and if so, whether that awareness can be objectively verified. Fact 4. Of the 2,060 cardiac arrest events screened in the AWARE study, only 330 patients survived. Of those, 140 were well enough to be interviewed. And of those 140 survivors, 46%, nearly half, reported some form of mental experience during the time they were clinically dead. Some described fragmented images. Others recalled vivid, structured narratives. A few reported nothing but a deep sense of peace. The number itself is striking. Nearly half, not a rare anomaly, not a statistical footnote. Fact 5. Within that 46%, the AWARE researchers applied a standardized scoring system to distinguish ordinary mental fragments from genuine near-death experiences. 9% of all survivors interviewed met the formal criteria. These people described specific, recurring elements: feelings of profound peace, the perception of a bright and welcoming light, and the distinct sensation of separating from their physical bodies. 9% may sound small, but applied to the millions of people who survive cardiac arrest worldwide each year, the number translates into tens of thousands of people annually who return from clinical death carrying these same memories. Fact 6. The brain can survive without oxygen for roughly 4 to 6 minutes before irreversible damage begins. This is the window. After 6 minutes, neurons begin to die in large numbers. The hippocampus, the region responsible for forming new memories, is among the first to suffer. The cortex follows. Then the deeper structures. But in those 4 to 6 minutes, the brain remains capable of activity. It is still processing, still generating electrical signals. And it is inside this narrow corridor of time that the entire phenomenon of near-death experiences occurs. 4 to 6 minutes, a span shorter than a commercial break on late-night television. Fact 7. Not all parts of the brain lose blood flow at the same rate during cardiac arrest. The cortex, the outer layer responsible for language, reasoning, and complex thought, depends on a constant supply of oxygenated blood and begins to fail within seconds. But the brainstem, the ancient structure at the base of the skull that governs basic arousal and awareness, has a slightly more resilient blood supply. It can remain active after the cortex has gone quiet. This means there may be a brief phase during which the brain's most primitive awareness system is still running, even as the higher thinking centers have shut down. Some researchers believe this staggered shutdown may help explain the unusual quality of NDE awareness: vivid but not analytical, emotional but not verbal. Fact 8. When the body experiences severe physical trauma, it releases a flood of endogenous chemicals. Among them are endorphins, the body's own opioid molecules. These natural painkillers bind to the same receptors targeted by morphine. During cardiac arrest, the stress response triggers a massive endorphin release. Some researchers believe this chemical surge accounts for the overwhelming feelings of peace and well-being that nearly every NDE experiencer describes. The pain vanishes. The fear dissolves. What remains is a warmth that many people struggle to put into words, a comfort that feels deeper than anything they have encountered in ordinary life. Fact 9. You may have heard the claim that the brain releases dimethyltryptamine, DMT, at the moment of death, and that this compound is responsible for near-death visions. The idea is popular. It appears in documentaries, podcasts, and countless online discussions. But here's what the research actually shows. DMT has been detected in rat brain tissue. That finding was published in 2019 by Dr. Jimo Borjagin's team at the University of Michigan. However, no study has confirmed that DMT is released in the human brain during cardiac arrest. No study has measured DMT levels in dying human patients. The hypothesis remains unproven. It is a possibility, not a fact. The distinction matters in science, even when the idea is compelling. Fact 10. Body temperature affects how long the brain can survive without oxygen. When patients are cooled to 33 degrees Celsius, a procedure called therapeutic hypothermia, their metabolic rate slows, and the window of brain viability extends. Hospitals now routinely use this technique after cardiac arrest to protect the brain during the minutes and hours of recovery. And here is a quiet detail worth noting. Some patients who undergo therapeutic hypothermia also report near-death experiences. Their brains were colder, their metabolism was slower, yet the experiences they describe carry the same elements: peace, light, separation from the body. The cooling did not prevent the experience. In some cases, it may have extended the window in which it could occur. These first facts describe what happens in the body when the heart stops. The next group of facts looks at what people consistently report experiencing during those same moments. Fact 11. In 1975, a young psychiatrist named Raymond Moody published a small book called Life After Life. In it, he compiled accounts from 150 people who had come close to death or been revived after clinical death. He noticed that their stories shared a common structure. 5 elements appeared again and again: a feeling of peace and the absence of pain, the sensation of leaving the physical body, passage through a dark space or tunnel, the appearance of a bright light, an entry into what they described as another realm or world. Moody did not claim to have proven anything about an afterlife. He simply documented the pattern. That pattern has held up across 50 years of subsequent research. Fact 12. Dr. Bruce Grayson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, developed the tool that researchers still use to measure near-death experiences. It is called the Grayson NDE scale, and he published it in 1983. The scale contains 16 items, each scored from 0 to 2. Questions address specific elements. Did you feel separated from your body? Did your senses seem more vivid than usual? Did you encounter a mystical being or presence? Did you reach a boundary or point of no return? A score of 7 or higher out of a possible 32 qualifies the experience as a near-death experience. The scale brought standardization to a field that had previously relied on anecdotes. It turned personal stories into measurable data. Fact 13. Roughly 24% of people who report a near-death experience describe an out-of-body component. They perceive themselves observing their own physical body from an elevated vantage point, typically from a position near the ceiling. They describe looking down. They see the medical team working. They notice details: the color of a nurse's hair tie, the specific instrument a doctor reaches for, the position of their own arms on the gurney. The experience feels completely real to them, not dreamlike, not hazy. They describe it with the clarity and conviction of an ordinary memory, sometimes with greater clarity. Fact 14. One of the most emotionally intense elements reported during NDEs is the life review. People describe a rapid, panoramic replay of their entire life, from earliest childhood through the present moment. But the review is not like watching a film. Experiencers consistently report that they relived each event from the perspectives of the other people involved. They felt the emotions they had caused in others: the joy, the hurt, the comfort, the neglect. A man who had been unkind to a coworker 20 years earlier felt that coworker's pain as if it were his own. A woman who had comforted a stranger on a bus felt that stranger's gratitude flowing back through her. The review, they say, was not a judgment imposed from outside. It was an experience of total empathic connection with every person they had ever touched. Fact 15. The tunnel. It is perhaps the most iconic image associated with near-death experiences, at least in Western accounts. People describe moving through a dark, enclosed space, sometimes described as a tunnel, sometimes as a corridor, sometimes as a void, toward a source of light at the far end. The movement feels effortless. There is no walking, no flying. They simply move. The light grows brighter as they approach it, but it does not hurt their eyes. It is warm. It is welcoming. And many people report that the light seems to radiate not just illumination, but something they interpret as unconditional love or acceptance. The tunnel appears in roughly 30 to 35% of Western NDE accounts. Fact 16. Many people who have near-death experiences report encountering other beings. Sometimes these beings are recognized as deceased relatives: a grandmother who died years earlier, a father who passed away in childhood. Sometimes they are figures the experiencer does not recognize, beings described as made of light, or presences felt rather than seen. Communication in these encounters is almost never described as verbal. People say the exchange was telepathic, instantaneous, complete, without the need for words. An entire complex thought or feeling was transmitted in a single moment. The experience, they report, felt more efficient and more honest than any conversation they had ever had in ordinary life. Fact 17. A recurring feature in NDE accounts is the boundary. People describe reaching a point beyond which they understand they cannot pass and still return to their bodies. The boundary takes different forms. Some see a river they must not cross. Others describe a fence, a hedge, a stone wall, a doorway filled with light. One woman described a field of wildflowers with an invisible line running through it. She knew, without being told in words, that if she stepped across that line, she could not go back. The boundary is not always visual. Sometimes it is simply a felt sense, a knowing. But in nearly every case, it marks the turning point of the experience. Fact 18. The return. Some people describe choosing to come back. They think of their children, their unfinished responsibilities, the people who need them. And with that thought, they find themselves pulled back into their bodies. Others describe having no choice at all. A being tells them it is not their time. A deceased relative gently turns them around. A voice, felt rather than heard, instructs them to go back. The return is almost never described as pleasant. People report re-entering their bodies with a sudden, heavy sensation. The pain returns. The weight of the physical form returns. Many describe it as putting on a suit of armor made of lead after floating without weight in warm water. Fact 19. Here is a detail that researchers find particularly striking. Many NDE experiencers express profound reluctance about returning to life. They describe the other realm, whatever it was, as more real than ordinary waking life. Not more dreamlike, more real. Colors were more vivid, perception was sharper, understanding was more complete. And the emotional quality of that space, the peace, the warmth, the sense of belonging, exceeded anything they had known in their embodied lives. Some people describe deep disappointment at being sent back, Others describe grief. A few describe anger. They had been somewhere that felt like home, and they were made to leave. Fact 20. Across 5 decades of research, the core pattern identified by Moody in 1975 has been confirmed by study after study. Grayson's standardized measurements, Parnia's hospital-based protocols, Pim van Lommel's prospective study of 344 cardiac arrest survivors in the Netherlands, all of them find the same recurring elements: peace, separation from the body, a passage, light, another realm, beings, a boundary, a return. The consistency is what makes the phenomenon so difficult to dismiss. These are not identical stories. They vary in detail, in sequence, in emotional texture. But the underlying architecture remains stable across age, gender, culture, and the medical circumstances of the cardiac arrest itself. These common patterns appear across thousands of reports. The next group of facts examines the most puzzling aspect of near-death experiences: cases where people accurately described events they should not have been able to perceive. Fact 21. The AWARE study produced one verified case that has become central to the scientific discussion of NDEs. A 57-year-old man suffered cardiac arrest in a hospital equipped with the study's monitoring protocols. After he was revived, he provided a detailed account of the resuscitation sequence. He described the actions of the medical staff. He recalled specific remarks made by the team. He identified the sounds made by the automated external defibrillator, including the machine's verbal instructions to the staff. His account was checked against the documented timeline of the resuscitation. It matched. The events he described occurred during a 3-minute window when he had no measurable heartbeat, and by conventional understanding, no capacity for conscious awareness. Fact 22. That same patient did not identify the hidden visual target placed on a high shelf in his room. This is a significant limitation. The AWARE study had positioned these targets, images visible only from a ceiling-level vantage point, to test whether out-of-body perception was genuinely visual. But the patient's experience, while accurate about the resuscitation, did not include recognition of the image. Dr. Parnia noted that the patient's out-of-body perception may have been focused on the activity below rather than on static objects in the room. Still, the failure to identify the target means the strongest possible evidence, accurate perception of a hidden image, remains uncollected. Fact 23. 2% of the AWARE participants reported explicit awareness with recall of seeing and hearing actual events during their resuscitation. 2%. A small number but medically remarkable. These were people whose hearts had stopped. Their blood pressure was 0. No oxygen was reaching their brains through normal circulation. And yet they formed accurate, verifiable memories during that window. They heard, they saw, they remembered. Current neuroscience does not have a complete model for how this can happen. The standard understanding is that consciousness requires cortical activity, and cortical activity requires oxygenated blood flow. Both were absent. Fact 24. The hidden visual targets placed on high shelves throughout the AWARE study's participating hospitals were never correctly identified by any patient. But context matters here. Most cardiac arrests in those hospitals did not occur in rooms equipped with the targets. Emergency resuscitations happen in hallways, in bathrooms, in ambulances, in rooms that were not part of the study's monitoring setup. Only a small fraction of the cardiac arrest events took place in spaces where a target was actually present. And of those, Even fewer patients survived and reported an out-of-body experience. The data was not negative so much as insufficient. The study was limited not by its design, but by the sheer unpredictability of when and where hearts stop. Fact 25. In 1991, a woman named Pam Reynolds underwent a surgical procedure called a standstill operation at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. Her body was cooled to 15.5 degrees Celsius. Her heart was stopped. Blood was drained from her head. Her brainstem was monitored with auditory click tests, and it showed no response. Her electroencephalogram showed a flat line. By every clinical measure, her brain was not functioning. And yet, after the surgery, she reported detailed observations. She described the shape of the bone saw used to open her skull, a tool she had never seen before, and she was right. She described a conversation between her surgeon and a female cardiac surgeon about the size of her femoral arteries. That conversation had occurred. She described it accurately. Fact 26. Dr. Kenneth Ring, a psychologist at the University of Connecticut, published a study in 1999 examining near-death experiences in people who had been blind from birth. The study was called Mindsight. He and his co-author Sharon Cooper collected accounts from 31 blind and severely visually impaired individuals who had experienced NDEs or out-of-body experiences. Among them were people who had never had any visual experience at all, congenitally blind from the moment of birth. And yet, during their NDEs, some of these individuals reported seeing. They described colors. They described the forms of people around them. They described visual details of environments they had never perceived through their eyes. Ring acknowledged the difficulty of verifying these reports, but the accounts themselves remain among the most challenging data points in NDE research. Fact 27. The methodological challenges of NDE research are enormous. Cardiac arrest is unpredictable. You cannot schedule it. You cannot place monitoring equipment in advance at the exact location where a heart will stop. Most resuscitations occur in chaotic, uncontrolled environments: ambulances, living rooms, parking lots, hospital corridors. Survival rates after cardiac arrest hover around 10% in most settings. And of those who survive, only a fraction report any experience at all. Researchers are trying to study a phenomenon that occurs in a narrow window of time, in uncontrolled locations, in patients who mostly do not survive, and who may not remember even if they do. It is like trying to photograph lightning inside a sealed room. Fact 28. Dr. Sam Parnia launched the Aware II study to address these limitations directly. The second study expanded the original protocol in several ways. It introduced portable brain monitoring equipment that could be attached to patients during active resuscitation, providing real-time electroencephalogram data. It added cerebral oximetry, a technology that measures oxygen levels in the brain through sensors placed on the forehead, and it increased the number of participating hospitals. The goal was to capture not just the patient's subjective reports, but the objective brain states occurring at the exact moments those reports describe. If a patient said they were aware at a specific point during resuscitation, the Aware II data could show whether their brain was producing measurable activity at that same point. Fact 29. In 2023, Parnia and his colleagues published results from the Aware II study, alongside additional data from a collaborating study at the University of Michigan. They found that some cardiac arrest patients displayed spikes of gamma and beta wave activity during CPR organized electrical patterns that are normally associated with conscious processing. These spikes occurred minutes into the resuscitation. The patient's hearts had been stopped for several minutes. Oxygen deprivation was ongoing, and yet the brain was generating signatures of consciousness. The findings did not prove that patients were having subjective experiences at those moments, but they showed that the neural machinery of awareness can flicker back to life in conditions where it was assumed to be silent. Fact 30. The question of veridical perception during NDEs remains open. No study has yet produced the definitive result, a patient accurately identifying a hidden target visible only from an out-of-body vantage point under fully controlled conditions. But the anecdotal evidence is voluminous. Researchers have collected hundreds of cases where patients reported accurate details they could not have obtained through normal sensory channels. Conversations in other rooms. Events behind opaque surgical drapes. The arrival of family members in distant waiting areas. Each individual case can be questioned. Memory is imperfect. Information could have been acquired subconsciously, but the sheer number of these reports and their consistency continues to push against the boundaries of conventional explanation. These verified perceptions raise questions that current neuroscience cannot fully answer. The next group of facts explores how the same core experience wears different cultural clothing around the world. Fact 31. When researchers began collecting NDE accounts from India in the 1970s and 1980s, they noticed something different. The Western tunnel motif, that passage through darkness toward a light, was rare. In its place, Indian experiencers described being taken by messengers. These messengers were identified as Yamduts, servants of Yama, the Hindu god of death. The Yamduts escorted the dying person not through a tunnel but along a road or path, arriving at an otherworldly place that looked less like a realm of light and more like a government office. There were desks. There were clerks. There were ledgers filled with names and records. The bureaucracy of the afterlife, it turned out, looked different depending on where you lived. Fact 32. Indian NDE accounts contain a feature that is almost entirely absent from Western reports: the administrative error. In case after case documented by researchers Satwant Pasricha and Ian Stevenson in the 1980s, Indian experiencers were told that a mistake had been made. The Yamduts had collected the wrong person. The name in the ledger did not match. The clerk would look up from the book, shake his head, and declare that this individual was not supposed to be here. The person was then sent back to their body, not because of a personal choice or a divine instruction, but because of a clerical error in the cosmic filing system. The experience carried the same emotional weight as Western NDE's peace, a sense of another realm, a return to the body. But the narrative framework was entirely different. Fact 33. The life review, so prominent in Western NDE accounts, takes a different form in Indian reports. Western experiencers typically describe a panoramic replay of their lives, often guided by a being of light who radiates unconditional acceptance. The emphasis is on emotional understanding, feeling the impact of your actions on others. In Indian accounts, the review process is more administrative. The clerks in Yama's office check whether the person's deeds match what is written in the records. The focus is not on emotional empathy but on karmic accuracy, whether the cosmic ledger balances. Both cultures are processing the same core question: how did you live your life? But they process it through fundamentally different frameworks. One emphasizes feeling, the other emphasizes accounting. Fact 34. Japanese near-death experiences share several core elements with Western accounts. Experiencers report peace, the perception of another realm, encounters with deceased relatives, and a clear sense that they were at a boundary between life and death. But the tunnel is essentially absent. Japanese NDE researchers, including Dr. Yashia Hata, have noted that the passage motif, when it appears at all, takes the form of walking through a meadow, crossing a river, or moving through a natural landscape. The enclosed, cylindrical tunnel that appears so often in American and European accounts does not appear in Japanese ones. The journey still happens, but it moves through open space, not enclosed darkness. Fact 35. In Japanese NDE accounts, the bright light that Westerners often describe as a personal, loving presence is more often described as an ambient quality of the environment. It is the light of another place, the way a landscape is illuminated, rather than a singular directed source. Some Japanese experiencers describe a garden bathed in soft, even light. Others describe a riverbank where the air itself seems to glow. The light is present, but it is part of the scenery rather than a character in the narrative. This difference may reflect cultural aesthetics as much as metaphysics. Japanese art and spiritual traditions often emphasize the quality of light in natural settings. The light of a specific season, a particular time of day, a certain kind of stillness. Fact 36. Researchers studying NDEs across cultures have found a consistent pattern beneath the variable surface. Dr. Bruce Grayson describes it as culture-specific costumes worn over a shared underlying structure. The costumes change. In India, you meet clerks. In the American Midwest, you meet Jesus or a being of light. In Japan, you cross a river bordered by flowers. But beneath these costumes, the same sequence unfolds. Separation from the body, entry into another realm, encounter with beings, arrival at a boundary, return. The architecture is consistent. The decoration is local. Fact 37. Children who have near-death experiences tend to report simpler, less culturally shaped versions of the experience. Dr. Melvin Morse, a pediatrician in Seattle, studied pediatric NDEs throughout the 1980s and 1990s. He found that young children, those under the age of 5 or 6, described light, a loving presence, and sometimes deceased relatives, but rarely reported the elaborate cultural and religious imagery that adults describe. A 3-year-old does not yet have a mental library of religious symbols to draw from. Their experiences are stripped down to what may be the basic elements: light, warmth, presence, and return. Fact 38. Near-death experiences have been reported by people of every major religious tradition: Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Jews. They have also been reported by atheists and agnostics, people who held no belief in an afterlife and expected nothing after death. The philosopher A.J. Ayer, one of the most prominent atheists of the 20th century, had an NDE during cardiac arrest in 1988. He described encountering a red light and two beings who appeared to be responsible for the governance of the universe. He wrote about the experience afterward. He did not convert. He did not abandon his philosophical positions, but he acknowledged that the experience was the most profound event of his life. Fact 39. Historical accounts that match the structure of modern NDEs stretch back thousands of years. In Plato's Republic, written around 380 BCE, there is a story known as the myth of A soldier named is killed in battle. His body is placed on a funeral pyre, but before the flames are lit, he revives and tells an elaborate story. He left his body, traveled with other souls to a place of judgment, witnessed the cosmic machinery that governs reincarnation, and was told to return and report what he had seen. The structural parallels with modern NDE accounts are precise: departure from the body, a journey, a realm, beings, a boundary, a return with a message. Fact 40. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, composed in the 8th century, describes a sequence of experiences that unfold after death. First comes the perception of a clear, brilliant light, then a series of encounters with peaceful and wrathful deities, then a life review in which one's actions are weighed, then a passage toward rebirth. The text was written as a guide to be read aloud to the dying, to help them navigate what was about to come. Whether you interpret it as spiritual instruction or as a cultural document, its structural correspondence with modern NDE reports is difficult to ignore. The same elements appear in the same order, separated by 1,200 years and half the circumference of the Earth. These cultural patterns suggest something shared beneath the surface of all human experience. The next group of facts examines what neuroscience has proposed and what it still cannot explain. Fact 41. The most straightforward neurological explanation for the NDE tunnel is oxygen deprivation in the visual cortex. When blood flow to the brain decreases, the cells in the center of the visual field, which have the highest metabolic demand, remain active slightly longer than those in the periphery. The result is a progressive narrowing of the visual field, creating the perception of a bright center surrounded by encroaching darkness. This effect has been documented in fighter pilots undergoing high-G centrifuge training. At 6 to 8 G-forces, blood drains from the head, vision narrows to a central point of light, and pilots sometimes report tunnel-like visual experiences before losing consciousness. The mechanism is real. The question is whether it accounts for the full tunnel experience, which in NDE accounts often includes movement, direction, and arrival at a destination. Fact 42. Dr. Kevin Nelson, a neurologist at the University of Kentucky, proposed the REM intrusion hypothesis in 2006. His theory suggests that the brainstem mechanisms responsible for generating REM sleep, the phase of sleep associated with vivid dreaming, can activate during the physiological crisis of cardiac arrest. If the REM system switches on while the person is unconscious, it could generate dreamlike imagery experienced as real. Nelson surveyed NDE experiencers and found that they were significantly more likely than control subjects to report other REM intrusion phenomena in their daily lives. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, and the sensation of waking up but being unable to move. The association is real. But critics point out that REM-generated dreams are typically fragmented, bizarre, and quickly forgotten, qualities that do not describe the structured, vivid, and permanently memorable nature of most NDEs. Fact 43. The temporal lobe, the region of the brain just above and behind the ears, has long been associated with mystical and transcendent experiences. Electrical stimulation of the temporal lobe during neurosurgery can produce feelings of a presence in the room, intense déjà vu, sudden emotional flooding, and the sensation of being outside one's body. The pioneering neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield documented these effects in the 1950s. Temporal lobe epilepsy patients sometimes report spontaneous mystical experiences during seizures. Some researchers have proposed that the physiological stress of cardiac arrest triggers abnormal electrical activity in the temporal lobes, producing NDE-like phenomenology. It is a plausible mechanism for some elements of the experience, particularly the sense of presence and the life review. Fact 44. The endorphin hypothesis addresses one of the most consistent features of NDEs, the overwhelming sense of peace. When the body undergoes severe trauma, the hypothalamus triggers a massive release of beta endorphins. These molecules are structurally similar to morphine and bind to the same mu-opioid receptors in the brain. The result is powerful analgesia and a sense of euphoria. Anyone who has experienced the calm that sometimes follows a serious injury, the minutes before the pain fully registers, has felt a mild version of this effect. During cardiac arrest, the endorphin release is likely enormous. It could explain why people who are, by all medical measures, in the process of dying report feeling more peaceful than they have ever felt in their lives. Fact 45. But here's what complicates these explanations. The gamma wave surge discovered by the University of Michigan team does not look like the random neural firing of a dying brain. It is organized, coherent, synchronized. The gamma oscillations observed in the rats after cardiac arrest were not chaotic electrical noise. They showed patterns of connectivity between the visual cortex, the auditory cortex, and association areas. The same patterns that in a healthy, awake brain are associated with conscious perception, and the binding together of sensory information into a unified experience. If the dying brain were simply misfiring, you would expect disorganized static. What the researchers found instead looked like a structured broadcast. Fact 46. No single neurological or neurochemical model accounts for all features of the near-death experience at once. The hypoxia model explains tunnel vision but not the life review. The REM intrusion model explains dreamlike imagery but not the heightened clarity. The endorphin model explains peace but not veridical perception. The temporal lobe model explains the sense of presence but not the encounter with specific, identifiable deceased relatives. Each model illuminates one corner of the phenomenon while leaving the rest in shadow. The experience appears to be more than any one mechanism can produce alone. Fact 47. One of the most commonly cited objections to the idea that NDEs represent genuine consciousness during clinical death is that they are simply hallucinations, the confused final output of a brain shutting down. But this objection runs into a specific problem. Hallucinations, whether produced by drugs, fever, sensory deprivation, or psychosis, tend to be disorganized, idiosyncratic, and quickly forgotten. NDE memories are none of these things. They are structured. They follow a consistent pattern, and they are remembered with a clarity and persistence that often exceeds the person's memories of real events from the same time period. Fact 48. Researchers at the University of Liège in Belgium conducted a study in 2013 comparing the memory characteristics of NDEs with memories of real events and memories of imagined events. They used a standardized memory characteristics questionnaire. NDE memories scored higher on measures of sensory detail, emotional intensity, and self-referential processing than memories of real events that had occurred around the same time. They were also rated as more vivid than memories of imagined events. The NDE memories did not fade like dreams. They did not become distorted over time. Years after the experience, they retained their detail and emotional force. Whatever NDEs are, they are laid down in memory with unusual permanence. Fact 49. The philosopher Thomas Metzinger, who studies the nature of self and consciousness, has proposed that NDEs may represent the brain's construction of a self-model under extreme conditions. In this view, the brain, deprived of sensory input and oxygen, defaults to generating an internal model of reality drawn from deep expectations about what death should be like. The tunnel, the light, the beings, the boundary, all are products of the brain's attempt to make sense of its own dissolution. It is an elegant hypothesis, but it does not fully explain why the content of these self-models is so consistent across people who have very different expectations about death, or why some of the perceptual content matches verifiable external events. Fact 50. The honest scientific position on near-death experiences, as of the most recent research, is this: we do not have a complete explanation. The phenomenon is real. People genuinely have these experiences during cardiac arrest, and the experiences are consistent, structured, and profoundly impactful. Some neurological mechanisms can account for some features, but no existing model explains all of the features together, and the cases of accurate veridical perception remain an unresolved challenge. The science is not settled. The mystery is still open, and for a phenomenon that has been reported for thousands of years across every human culture, that openness may be the most honest thing we can say. Science continues to search for a complete explanation. The next group of facts looks at what happens after people return, because the most consistent evidence may be the transformation itself. Fact 51. The single most commonly reported aftereffect of a near-death experience is the loss of the fear of death. This is not a subtle change. It is a fundamental reorientation. People who previously feared death, who avoided thinking about it, who felt anxiety at the thought of their own mortality, return from their NDEs with that fear simply gone. Not suppressed, not rationalized away. Gone. Studies by Grayson and others have found that this loss of death anxiety persists for decades. It does not wear off. It does not gradually return. People tested 20 and 30 years after their NDEs still show dramatically lower death anxiety than matched controls who survived cardiac arrest without an NDE. Fact 52. Many NDE experiencers report a marked increase in empathy following their return. They describe feeling other people's emotions more directly and more intensely than they did before. Some describe it as a kind of permeability, as if the boundary between their own emotional life and the emotional lives of others has become thinner. Researchers speculate that this may be connected to the life review, in which people experience their past actions from the perspectives of others. Having once felt what another person felt because of your actions, you may become permanently more attuned to the emotional states of the people around you. The empathy is not theoretical. It is experienced as a change in perception. Fact 53. A consistent pattern in the research literature is a decreased interest in material wealth and social status following an NDE. People who were previously ambitious, career-driven, and focused on financial success describe a shift in priorities. Money feels less important. Job titles feel less meaningful. The accumulation of possessions loses its appeal. What replaces these motivations varies. Some people turn toward relationships, others toward creative work, others toward service. But the movement away from material striving is remarkably consistent. Dr. Pim van Lommel's prospective study in the Netherlands found that NDE experiencers showed significantly more change in attitudes toward materialism than cardiac arrest survivors who did not have NDEs. even when measured 8 years later. Fact 54. A significant number of NDE experiencers change careers after their return. They leave business, law, finance, and engineering to enter helping professions: nursing, counseling, social work, chaplaincy, teaching. The shift is often dramatic and difficult to explain to the people around them. A corporate attorney quits to become a hospice volunteer. An investment banker enrolls in nursing school at age 45. A construction contractor begins training as a grief counselor. The career changes are not random. They move consistently in one direction, toward work that involves direct care for other human beings. Researchers who have studied this pattern note that it mirrors the values expressed during the NDE itself, particularly the Life Review, in which the importance of human connection is reinforced with overwhelming emotional force. Fact 55. The personality changes that follow a near-death experience are so profound that they often strain the experiencer's closest relationships. Marriages are particularly vulnerable. The person who returns from an NDE may be, in a very real sense, a different person than the one who left. Their values have shifted. Their priorities have changed. They may no longer care about the things that once defined their shared life with their partner: the house, the career trajectory, the social calendar. Divorce rates among NDE experiencers are notably high, not because the experiencer becomes hostile or withdrawn, but because they become someone their partner does not fully recognize. The change is often described as irreversible. Fact 56. Some NDE experiencers report increased sensitivity to light and sound that persists long after the event. Bright lights feel more intense. Loud environments become difficult to tolerate. A few describe an enhanced ability to perceive subtle sensory details: the texture of a leaf, the overtones in a piece of music, the play of light on water. Whether this represents a genuine change in sensory processing or a shift in attention, a greater tendency to notice and attend to sensory experience, is not yet clear, but the reports are consistent enough to appear in multiple large-scale surveys of NDE aftereffects. Fact 57. One of the more unusual claims made by NDE experiencers is that they seem to affect electronic equipment. Watches stop working on their wrists. Streetlights go out when they walk beneath them. Computers malfunction in their presence. Credit card magnetic strips demagnetize. This phenomenon has been reported often enough to have its own informal name among NDE researchers: electrical sensitivity. It has not been confirmed under controlled laboratory conditions. No peer-reviewed study has demonstrated that NDE experiencers generate measurable electromagnetic fields that differ from those of non-experiencers. But the anecdotal reports persist, and they appear across culturally and geographically diverse populations. Fact 58. Many experiencers describe developing an intense thirst for knowledge after their NDE. They read voraciously. They enroll in courses. They pursue subjects they had never previously considered: philosophy, quantum physics, comparative religion, neuroscience. The desire to learn feels urgent to them, though the urgency is not anxious. It is more like a deep hunger that has been awakened. Some describe it as connected to their NDE. During the experience, they felt they had accessed a form of total understanding that faded when they returned to the body, and the drive to learn is an attempt to recover even a fraction of that lost knowledge. Fact 59. The aftereffects of near-death experiences are remarkably consistent across demographics. They appear in men and women, in people of all ages, in every socioeconomic bracket, in every culture studied. A factory worker in Japan and a schoolteacher in Brazil and a retired engineer in Norway describe the same shifts: less fear of death, more empathy, less materialism, more interest in learning, changed relationships, changed career priorities. The consistency of the transformation is itself a data point. Whatever the NDE is, it produces a reliable set of changes in the people who undergo it. It functions less like a random hallucination and more like a systematic recalibration. Fact 60. The question this raises is not just what caused the experience. It is what kind of experience has the power to permanently change a person's values, relationships, career, sensory perception, and orientation toward death, all in the space of a few minutes during which their heart was not beating. Psychotherapy takes months or years to produce even modest personality changes. Medication adjusts brain chemistry without altering core values. Religious conversion sometimes produces dramatic change, but it typically requires extended periods of social reinforcement. The NDE accomplishes something in minutes that other transformative processes accomplish over years, if at all. The speed and depth of the change is itself a phenomenon that demands explanation. These lasting changes suggest the NDE touches something fundamental in the person who experiences it. The next group of facts explores accounts from children and from the moments just before natural death. Fact 61. Dr. Melvin Morse spent more than a decade studying near-death experiences in children. His research, conducted primarily at Children's Hospital in Seattle during the 1980s and 1990s, focused on pediatric patients who had survived cardiac arrest or come dangerously close to death. He found that children as young as 3 years old reported core NDE elements. They described a bright light. They described a warm, loving presence. Some described meeting a deceased relative. Their accounts were simple, free of the elaborate religious imagery that colors adult reports. A 3-year-old does not know what a tunnel is supposed to look like. A 4-year-old has no concept of a life review. What remains when you strip away the cultural overlay is something elemental: light, warmth, love, and return. Fact 62. Among the most striking cases in pediatric NDE research are children who describe meeting relatives they did not know existed. A child revived after drowning describes a man she met during her experience. A tall, gentle man who told her she had to go back. She describes his appearance in detail. Her parents, shaken, recognize the description as the child's grandfather, who died 2 years before the child was born. The child had never seen a photograph. No one had described his appearance to her. Morse documented several cases with this pattern. They are anecdotal, and memory reconstruction is always a concern. But the cases are difficult to explain through conventional models of how a child's brain generates imagery. Fact 63. Deathbed visions are a distinct phenomenon from near-death experiences. They occur not during cardiac arrest or trauma, but in the hours or days before a natural death. Patients who are alert and oriented, not delirious, not medicated to the point of confusion, report seeing deceased relatives in their hospital rooms. The relatives are described as arriving, coming to collect them, waiting patiently at the foot of the bed or beside the window. The patients are not distressed by these visions. They are comforted. They often speak to the visitors, addressing them by name, carrying on conversations that the living people in the room can only hear one side of. Fact 64. Dr. Peter Fenwick, a British neuropsychiatrist, conducted a systematic study of deathbed visions in hospices and palliative care units across the United Kingdom. He and his wife, Elizabeth Fenwick, collected accounts from hospice nurses, physicians, and family members. They found that the visions followed consistent patterns regardless of the patient's diagnosis, medication regimen, or level of consciousness. Patients with clear minds and patients with mild confusion both reported the same type of visitor, deceased relatives, arriving with calm purpose. The visions were not correlated with morphine use or other medications known to cause hallucinations. They occurred in patients on no medication at all. Fact 65. Hospice nurses who work closely with dying patients report a recognizable change in patients who begin experiencing deathbed visions. The patient becomes calmer. Anxiety about dying, which may have been present for weeks or months, dissipates. The patient often shifts from resistance to acceptance, sometimes within hours of the first vision. Nurses describe this transition as one of the most consistent patterns they observe in end-of-life care. Whatever the visions are real visitors, neural artifacts, comforting hallucinations, their effect on the dying person is measurable and beneficial. Fear leaves the room. Fact 66. Terminal lucidity is a phenomenon that occurs in the final hours or days of life in patients with severe neurological impairment. A patient with advanced Alzheimer's disease who has not spoken coherently in months will suddenly become alert, recognize family members, carry on clear conversations, and express lucid, appropriate emotions. A patient with a brain tumor that has destroyed large areas of cortical tissue will sit up and speak normally. These episodes typically last minutes to hours before the patient declines again and dies. They are well documented in medical literature. Case reports stretch back to the 19th century. The phenomenon is deeply puzzling because it suggests that cognitive function can temporarily return in brains that, by structural analysis, should not be capable of producing it. Fact 67. The neuroscientific implications of terminal lucidity are significant. If a brain with extensive structural damage, plaques, tangles, tumor infiltration, neuron loss, can produce clear consciousness even briefly, then our models of how consciousness depends on brain structure may be incomplete. The standard model holds that consciousness is produced by specific neural circuits, and when those circuits are damaged, the corresponding cognitive functions are permanently lost. Terminal lucidity contradicts this prediction. It suggests that consciousness may be more like a signal that can sometimes bypass damaged hardware, or that the brain's relationship to awareness is more flexible than current models assume. Fact 68. Dr. Raymond Moody, the psychiatrist who coined the term near-death experience, has also documented a phenomenon he calls the shared death experience. In these cases, a healthy person who is present at the bedside of a dying individual reports participating in the dying person's transition. They may see a light enveloping the room. They may feel a sensation of expansion, as if the room's walls have fallen away. Some report perceiving deceased relatives who seem to be arriving for the dying person. A few describe feeling themselves lift out of their own bodies momentarily. These experiences occur in people who are not ill, not medicated, and not in any physiological crisis. They are simply present at the moment of another person's death. Fact 69. Shared death experiences are reported by doctors, nurses, family members, and friends. They are not limited to people with prior spiritual beliefs or NDE knowledge. A hospice physician in England who had never given afterlife claims any credence described watching a mist rise from a patient's body at the moment of death and feeling, simultaneously, a brief but distinct sensation of peace and expansion that she could not attribute to any known medical cause. These accounts are entirely anecdotal. They cannot be produced on demand for study, but their consistency with the phenomenology of NDEs, light, peace, the presence of deceased relatives, a sense of expanded awareness, adds another layer to a phenomenon that resists simple categorization. Fact 70. What the accounts of children, deathbed visions, terminal lucidity, and shared death experiences have in common is that they all challenge the assumption that the NDE is purely a product of a brain in crisis. Children too young to have cultural programming report the same core elements. Dying patients with no cardiac arrest, no oxygen deprivation, no gamma surge, see visitors and grow peaceful. Brains with massive structural damage produce moments of clear consciousness. Healthy people standing beside the dying report participating in the experience. The phenomenon, whatever it is, appears to be broader than any single neurological mechanism. It seems to be related not just to the dying brain, but to the boundary of death itself. These accounts from children and the dying suggest that whatever NDEs are, they are not limited to a single age or circumstance. The next group of facts traces these experiences across history. Fact 71. The myth of found in the final pages of Plato's Republic, is one of the oldest detailed accounts of a near-death experience in Western literature. Is a soldier from Pamphylia who is killed in battle. His body is recovered 10 days later, still showing no signs of decay. Placed on the funeral pyre, he revives and tells his story. He describes leaving his body. He describes traveling with a group of other souls to a place of judgment. He describes seeing a great spindle of light that holds the universe together, the cosmic machinery that governs the motion of the stars. He describes souls choosing their next lives, and he describes being told to return to the living and report what he has seen. The structural elements: departure from the body, a journey, an otherworldly realm, beings, a cosmic mechanism, a return with a message, match modern NDE accounts point by point. Fact 72. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, composed in the 8th century CE and attributed to the Buddhist master Padmasambhava, provides an even more detailed map. The text describes the experiences of consciousness after death as a series of bardos, intermediate states between death and rebirth. In the first bardo, the dying person perceives a brilliant, clear light. If they recognize the light as the true nature of mind, they are liberated. If they do not, they move into the second bardo, where they encounter both peaceful and wrathful deity forms, manifestations of their own mental projections. Then comes a review of their life. Then a passage toward rebirth, guided by the momentum of their past actions. The text was designed to be read aloud to the dying, serving as a navigational guide through territory the Tibetans believed was as real as any landscape on Earth. Fact 73. Medieval Christian Europe produced dozens of accounts that match the modern NDE pattern. In the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great compiled stories of people who had died and returned in his work Dialogues. A soldier described being taken to a bridge over a dark river. On the far side were beautiful meadows and people dressed in white. He was told to go back. A merchant described floating above his body and seeing his weeping family below. A monk described entering a realm of light where he was shown the interconnectedness of all things. These accounts were interpreted as visions of heaven or purgatory, but stripped of their theological framing. Their phenomenological content is indistinguishable from what modern cardiac arrest survivors describe. Fact 74. The Venerable Bede, the great English historian and monk, recorded the near-death experience of a man named Drithelm in his Ecclesiastical History of the English People, written around 731 CE. Drithelm was a pious layman living in Northumbria. He fell ill, died one evening, and revived the next morning to the astonishment of his mourning family. He described being guided by a being of light through 4 distinct regions: a valley half frozen and half burning, a vast dark pit, a meadow of extraordinary beauty, and a realm of light so intense he could barely perceive it. He was told he must return. After his revival, Drithelm gave away his possessions, entered a monastery, and spent the rest of his life in prayer and cold water immersion in the river Tweed, even in winter. His transformation mirrors the aftereffects modern researchers document 1,300 years later. Fact 75. Indigenous cultures across every inhabited continent have traditional accounts of death and return journeys that share structural features with clinical NDEs. Shamanic traditions in Siberia, the Amazon basin, West Africa, and Aboriginal Australia describe initiated individuals who undergo a ritual or involuntary death-like state, leave their bodies, travel to another realm, encounter spirits or ancestors, receive knowledge or healing power, and return to the living world transformed. These traditions predate modern medicine by centuries or millennia. The structural parallels are not identical. Shamanic journeys often involve specific tasks or initiatory ordeals, but the core architecture of departure, journey, encounter, and return is the same. Fact 76. The Greek historian Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE, recorded the near-death experience of a man named Thespesius of Soli. Thespesius fell from a height, struck his head, and was believed dead for 3 days. When he revived, he described an elaborate journey through the afterlife. He floated above his body. He traveled through regions of light and darkness. He witnessed souls being purified and judged. He met a relative who explained the workings of the cosmos to him. He was then told to return. After his revival, Thespesius underwent a complete moral transformation, from a man known for dishonesty and self-indulgence to a person of integrity and generosity. His neighbors in Soli reportedly found the change so dramatic that they began using his story as a moral teaching tool. Fact 77. The philosophical implications of near-death experiences remain genuinely unresolved. The phenomenon is consistent with at least 2 fundamentally different interpretations. The first is that consciousness can exist independently of the physical brain, and that NDEs represent a brief glimpse of that independent existence. The second is that the dying brain, under extreme conditions, produces an extraordinarily vivid and structured final experience that has no existence beyond the neural activity that generates it. Both interpretations account for some of the data. Neither accounts for all of it. Serious scientists hold each position. The question is not settled. Fact 78. A.J. Ayer's NDE in 1988 is a particularly interesting case because of who Ayer was. He was one of the 20th century's most influential logical positivists, a philosopher who built his career on the principle that only empirically verifiable statements are meaningful. He regarded claims about consciousness surviving death as literally nonsensical. Then, at age 77, His heart stopped for 4 minutes after he choked on a piece of smoked salmon. He described encountering a red light that he took to be responsible for the government of the universe, and two creatures who seemed to be its ministers. After his recovery, he wrote an article for the Sunday Telegraph titled, "What I Saw When I Was Dead." He stated that the experience had slightly weakened his conviction that death meant total annihilation. He later revised this, saying it had not weakened his conviction at all. His friends reported otherwise. Fact 79. The tension between philosophical materialism and NDE evidence has produced some of the most careful and intellectually honest writing in the field. Researchers like Parnia, Grayson, and Van Lommel are not mystics or New Age enthusiasts. They are physicians and scientists with decades of clinical experience. They acknowledge the neurological evidence. They understand the known mechanisms that can produce altered states of consciousness. And they maintain that the totality of the NDE data, the veridical perceptions, the consistent structure, the transformative aftereffects, the cases in children and the blind, cannot yet be fully explained by those mechanisms alone. They are not claiming to have proven an afterlife. They are claiming that the question remains open and deserves serious investigation. Fact 80. Across all historical periods and all human cultures, the people who return from the edge of death carry a remarkably similar message. Not a message about theology or doctrine or the correct religious framework. The message is simpler than that and more personal. They say that what matters is how you treated the people around you. They say that love, not in the romantic sense, but in the sense of genuine concern for the well-being of others, is the central organizing principle of whatever they experienced. They say that the accumulation of wealth, status, and power feels irrelevant in the presence of what they encountered. They say this whether they are Hindu or Christian or atheist, whether they are 8 years old or 80, whether they died on an operating table in Tokyo or in a flooded rice paddy in Vietnam. Modern science is only beginning to map this territory. The next group of facts brings us to the present, where researchers are using new tools to study what was once beyond measurement. Fact 81. Dr. Sam Parnia's Aware II study represents the most sophisticated attempt to date to measure consciousness during cardiac arrest in real time. Unlike the original AWARE study, which relied primarily on post-event interviews, AWARE II uses portable electroencephalogram devices attached to patients during active resuscitation. These devices record brain electrical activity continuously from the moment CPR begins, capturing data that would have been impossible to obtain even a decade earlier. The study also uses cerebral oximetry, sensors placed on the patient's forehead that measure oxygen saturation in the frontal lobes. Together, these tools provide an objective physiological timeline that can be compared against the patient's subjective report of what they experienced and when. Fact 82. The results published from AWARE II and its collaborating studies in 2023 included a finding that drew attention across the neuroscience community. During CPR, some patients displayed clear spikes of gamma wave and beta wave activity, brainwave patterns that are normally associated with higher-order cognitive processing in fully conscious individuals. These spikes occurred minutes into the resuscitation attempt. The patients' hearts had been stopped for extended periods. Oxygen levels in their brains were critically low. And yet, the EEG showed electrical signatures that looked, in their frequency and organization, like those of an aware and processing brain. The findings do not prove that the patients were consciously experiencing anything at those moments, but they demonstrate that the neural correlates of consciousness can reappear in conditions where they were assumed to be absent. Fact 83. The University of Michigan team that discovered the post-cardiac arrest gamma surge in rats in 2013 has continued to refine their research. Led by Dr. Jimo Borjajan, the team is developing protocols to study whether similar surges occur in human patients. The challenge is substantial. In rats, the researchers could control the timing and circumstances of cardiac arrest precisely. In humans, cardiac arrest is an emergency, and the ethical constraints are absolute. No protocol can delay or alter resuscitation to accommodate a research design. The team's approach has been to embed their monitoring equipment into existing clinical protocols, capturing data during standard resuscitation procedures without interfering with patient care. Fact 84. Large-scale retrospective studies estimate that between 10 and 20% of cardiac arrest survivors report some form of near-death experience. The variation in estimates depends on how strictly the NDE is defined, how soon after the event survivors are interviewed, and what cultural context the study operates in. Dr. Pim van Lommel's Dutch study, published in The Lancet in 2001, found that 18% of cardiac arrest survivors reported NDEs. A German study found a lower percentage. An American study found a higher one. The point of convergence is that NDEs are a common feature of cardiac arrest survival, not a rare outlier, not a statistical anomaly, but a recurring phenomenon observed in a substantial minority of every large sample studied. Fact 85. The International Association for Near-Death Studies, known as IANDS, maintains a database of over 4,000 detailed NDE accounts. These accounts have been collected over several decades from experiencers around the world who submitted their stories voluntarily. The database allows researchers to search for patterns across demographics, comparing accounts by age, gender, nationality, cause of clinical death, and specific elements reported. Pattern analysis of this database has confirmed the consistency of core NDE features across all demographic groups, while also revealing subtler variations in how different populations describe their experiences. The database is not a controlled study, but as a resource for identifying recurring themes in a large, diverse sample, it has no equivalent. Fact 86. Functional MRI studies of long-term NDE experiencers, people who had their experience years or decades ago, have revealed altered patterns of brain connectivity. Research conducted at the University of Liège found that NDE experiencers show different activation patterns in brain regions associated with self-referential processing, emotional memory, and the default mode network, the brain's resting state network that activates when a person is engaged in introspection and mind wandering. The changes were still detectable years after the NDE. Whether these altered patterns are a cause of the NDE experience, a consequence of it, or a pre-existing trait that made certain individuals more likely to have an NDE, is a question that remains open. Fact 87. The emergence of psychedelic research in clinical psychology has created an unexpected bridge to NDE studies. Dimethyltryptamine, DMT, produces experiences that share structural features with near-death experiences. Users of DMT report leaving their bodies, entering another realm, encountering beings who communicate telepathically, and experiencing a sense of profound meaning and interconnection. Dr. Chris Timmerman at Imperial College London published a study in 2018 comparing DMT experiences with NDEs using the Grayson NDE scale. The overlap was significant. DMT experiencers scored in the NDE range on many of the scale's items. The two experiences are not identical. DMT experiences tend to include more alien and geometric imagery, but the structural correspondence has prompted researchers to explore whether similar neurochemical pathways are involved. Fact 88. The ketamine model of NDEs proposed by Dr. Carl Jansen in the 1990s offers another pharmacological comparison. Ketamine, a dissociative anesthetic that blocks NMDA receptors in the brain, can produce experiences that resemble several NDE elements: separation from the body, movement through a dark space, perception of light, and encounters with presences. Jansen hypothesized that the dying brain may release endogenous compounds that act on the same NMDA receptors ketamine targets. The model is elegant and accounts for several NDE features, but it does not explain the transformative aftereffects. Ketamine users do not typically emerge from their experiences with permanently altered values, reduced death anxiety, and increased empathy in the way NDE experiencers do. Fact 89. The convergence of NDE research, psychedelic research, and consciousness studies has placed the near-death experience at the center of one of the most important unsolved problems in science: the hard problem of consciousness. How does subjective experience arise from physical matter? How does the electrical and chemical activity of neurons produce the felt quality of seeing red, hearing music, or feeling love? NDEs intensify this question because they suggest that subjective experience can occur under conditions where the known neural correlates of consciousness are absent or severely degraded. If consciousness can persist, even briefly, without the brain activity we believe is necessary to produce it, then our understanding of the relationship between brain and mind may need to be revised. Fact 90. The honest state of the science is one of informed uncertainty. Researchers have documented the phenomenon thoroughly. They have measured brainwave activity during clinical death. They have cataloged thousands of accounts across cultures and centuries. They have identified neurological mechanisms that can explain some features of the experience. And they have encountered cases, veridical perceptions, blind patients who see, children who meet relatives they never knew, that their models cannot yet account for. The field is not divided between believers and skeptics, so much as between researchers who believe the existing models are sufficient and simply need refinement, and researchers who believe the data points towards something that will require a genuinely new framework to understand. The final group of facts steps back to consider what these experiences, whatever their cause, reveal about the nature of being human. Fact 91. The most consistent message reported by NDE experiencers across all cultures is the primacy of love and compassion. This is not a metaphor. It is a data point. When researchers ask NDE experiencers what they learned, the answer does not vary with education, income, nationality, or religious background. They say that relationships and kindness matter more than achievement or accumulation. They say this not as a moral position they have reasoned their way to, but as something they experienced directly, as a felt truth, as vivid and immediate as the sensation of warmth from a fire. The consistency of this message across thousands of independent accounts, gathered by different researchers in different countries over different decades, is one of the most stable findings in the entire field. Fact 92. Many experiencers describe gaining access to a form of knowledge that felt total and complete during their NDE, an understanding of how everything connects. They use different language for it. Some call it understanding the fabric of everything. Others describe knowing, in a single moment, the answer to every question they had ever asked. The experience of total knowledge is almost always described as fading upon return to the body. It does not translate back into ordinary cognition. What remains is a residual sense that the understanding existed, that it was real and complete, but the content itself is largely inaccessible. Like waking from a dream in which you solved a problem perfectly, only to find the solution has evaporated by the time your eyes are open. Fact 93. The NDE suggests that human consciousness may be more resilient than clinical measurements indicate. People form coherent memories during periods when their brains show no measurable electrical activity. They report organized, structured experiences during conditions of severe oxygen deprivation. Their awareness persists in states where current models predict it should be absent. This does not prove that consciousness is independent of the brain, but it suggests that the relationship between brain activity and conscious experience is more complex and perhaps more flexible than the standard model assumes. Awareness may have a wider operating range than we currently understand. Fact 94. The phenomenon of near-death experiences sits precisely at the intersection where neuroscience, philosophy, and spirituality meet. No single discipline has full authority. Neuroscience can describe the brain states associated with NDEs, but cannot yet explain the veridical perceptions. Philosophy can frame the conceptual questions, but cannot resolve them empirically. Spiritual traditions have described similar experiences for millennia, but cannot submit their interpretations to controlled testing. The NDE is a genuine interdisciplinary problem, one that requires all three perspectives and is fully answered by none of them. Fact 95. Whether NDEs are a window into something beyond the physical body or the brain's most extraordinary final performance, they reveal a capacity for experience that exceeds our ordinary understanding of what the mind can do. Consider what the dying brain reportedly produces in the span of a few minutes. A complete life review, experienced from multiple perspectives simultaneously. An out-of-body vantage point that in some cases corresponds to verifiable events. An encounter with beings who communicate entire concepts instantaneously. An emotional experience of peace and love that surpasses anything the person encountered in decades of embodied life. Even if all of this is generated by neurons alone, the generating capacity on display is staggering. Fact 96. Every living person carries the same neural architecture that produces these experiences. The brainstem, the temporal lobes, the visual cortex, the endorphin system, the gamma oscillation networks. All of the structures implicated in NDEs are present in your brain right now. The capacity for this type of experience is not restricted to a special subset of humanity. It appears to be standard equipment. Everyone who possesses a human brain possesses the hardware that, under the right or wrong conditions, can produce the most vivid, structured, and transformative experience a person will ever have. Fact 97. The study of near-death experiences has had a quiet but measurable impact on medical practice. Hospitals that participate in NDE research have become more attentive to the subjective experience of cardiac arrest survivors. Resuscitation protocols increasingly acknowledge that the patient may be having some form of conscious experience even during CPR. Dr. Parnia has advocated for changes in how patients are treated and spoken to during resuscitation, based on the possibility that they may be able to hear and perceive what is happening around them. The research has not changed the mechanics of saving lives, but it has changed how some clinicians think about the person whose life they are saving. Fact 98. The NDE also raises a question that medicine is only beginning to grapple with. When does consciousness actually end? Clinical death, the cessation of heartbeat and breathing, was once considered the definitive boundary. But NDE research suggests that consciousness may extend beyond that line. Brain death, the irreversible loss of all brain function, is now the legal standard in most countries. But the gamma surges measured during cardiac arrest, the veridical perceptions, and the accounts of terminal lucidity all suggest that the boundary between consciousness and its absence is not as sharp or as simple as a line on a monitor. It may be more like a gradient, a slow transition, a dimming rather than a switch. Fact 99. The study of near-death experiences returns us in the end to the oldest human question. What is consciousness? What is its relationship to the physical body? Is awareness something the brain produces, the way a kidney produces urine and a liver produces bile? Or is awareness something the brain receives, filters, transmits, the way a radio does not create the music but shapes and delivers it? These are not new questions. Philosophers have debated them for 25 centuries. But NDE research has given these old questions new empirical teeth. There is data now, not enough to answer the question, but enough to prevent anyone from answering it too quickly. Fact 100. Tonight, as your own awareness softens toward the edges of waking life, your brain will pass through its own quiet transitions. The electrical rhythms will shift. Alpha waves will give way to theta. Theta will deepen into delta. Your sense of self will loosen. The boundary between you and the world will become less defined. And then, for hours, you will exist in a state that still puzzles neuroscience. A state where consciousness transforms rather than disappears, where the brain generates entire worlds of experience without any input from the outside. You do this every night. You have done it thousands of times, and you think nothing of it. But it is, in its own way, a rehearsal of the same boundary that millions of people have briefly crossed and returned from, the boundary where awareness changes form. And what lies on the other side remains the most intimate mystery any human being will ever face. And here, at the end of our 100 facts, the subject does not close. It opens. Every night, without ceremony, you cross a threshold. Your awareness dissolves. Your sense of self becomes thin and permeable. The brain shifts from one mode of consciousness to another, from waking to dreaming to the deep, slow oscillations of dreamless rest. You do not fear this transition. You welcome it. You lie down and let it happen. The people who return from near-death experiences describe something that rhymes with this nightly crossing, but louder. The dissolution is deeper. The light is brighter. The peace is more complete. And the return is harder because what they found on the other side felt, by every account, more real than what they came back to. The gamma surge that the University of Michigan team measured in dying brains and the slow oscillations that your brain will produce tonight are not the same phenomenon, but they share a quality. They are both states where consciousness transforms rather than vanishes. The brain does not simply turn off. It changes mode. It enters territory that we do not yet have the instruments or the language to fully map. Across every culture and century we have examined tonight, the people who cross the boundary and return carry the same quiet observation. Not a doctrine, not a theology, just a simple report from the other side of a line they did not expect to recross. They say that what matters is not what you accumulated, not the title, not the account balance, not the house, not the reputation. What matters, what they felt with the force of direct experience, is how you treated the people beside you. The small kindnesses, the attention given to someone who needed it, the patience extended when it would have been easier to look away. That message appears in the NDE accounts of ancient Greek soldiers and modern Japanese schoolchildren and middle-aged accountants in the American Midwest. It appears in the reports of atheists and monks and people who had never thought about death at all until the day their hearts stopped. Whether it comes from beyond the brain or from within it, the message has been remarkably consistent for a very long time. And now your own brain is doing what it does each night. The thoughts are slowing. The edges of attention are becoming soft. The day is dissolving into something quieter. You rest in the same awareness that those travelers briefly carried beyond the boundary and brought back. A steady, quiet, and older than any single life. Good night.